the best way to start trying to gain some position of authority in a team in a soft power way is to review code. Juniors, seniors, doesn't matter. If you want to have a say over how features get implemented in your code base, you have to understand the code base. And there's no better way to understand it than to read the code that's going into it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Web Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Ocel, VP of Innovation at This.Labs. Today, we are very excited to sit down and talk with Noah Harris. Noah is a Senior Engineering Manager at Launch. Noah, how are you doing?
I'm well. Thank you, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing really well. In fact, I got so excited to talk to you. I forgot to introduce my co-host today, Adam Rackis. Adam is a Senior Software Engineer at Spotify. Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. It's good to be here.
Yeah, we had a little bit of like the Colbert Report, if you ever watched that show, when like the guest is actually at the desk first and then he introduces himself and like comes out to the crowd's applause. Had a little bit of that. So, Adam, we're really excited Adam's here today as well. All right. Well, Noah, there's a lot that we want to talk to you about, but one of the things that I think that we are interested in hearing about is you just gave a talk at a conference in Dallas like a couple months ago about mob programming. And, it really inspired me. And I think the minds of a lot of people listening, both people like juniors that had never even heard of this before, to seniors that either felt very strongly one way or the other about it. So maybe to introduce it, can you kind of take us a little bit on your journey of sort of mob programming or paired programming and sort of how your opinions towards it have evolved?
Ooh, okay. So origin story. When I first entered the professional workforce, I started working in JavaScript. And I came from C and C++, right? So strongly typed languages into what is effectively the Wild West of code. And it was very exciting for the first month or so because you could just do whatever you wanted and you could change things on the fly. And then as soon as you realize you have to maintain this insanity of code that you write, it becomes painful. And during this, I picked up Node.js and I started to pick up React Native around the same time. This is back in 2017, 2018. I struggled with the concept that my code is not executing in the order in which I've written it, because I would write asynchronous calls not knowing, really understanding promises. And then I would get data too later. The data wouldn't be present, or even worse, it'd be present sometimes and not other times. And I really struggled. And so what helped me the most was to pair up with a senior programmer who'd been in the space on the problem in the company for a while, who could just kind of back and forth with me. He's like, oh yeah, by the way, he would mention something, but I would have to jot it down. I keep sticky notes on my desk, and I was like, I have to jot it down. I got to go look this up. I don't know what this means. I asked him about this particular thing. I was making an API call to a CRM to save an ID, and I was like, why isn't the ID saving but half the time? And he's like, oh, you need async await. Excuse me? Got to go look that up. Got to go understand how it works. And turns out, this is maybe getting a little off topic, but turns out having to migrate from callback hell to async await and promises is a little painful, actually. So I learned. But the long story short is that I used pair programming, not mob programming, but pair programming to exponentiate the speed at which I was able to learn and pick up JavaScript. And it worked well. It was a small team, just a couple people working together. And then when I got into larger groups, started working at Launch before we were acquired, I was on a team of 10 engineers or so. And you start to run into that communication problem. And I don't have the word or the name on the top of my head, but it's a circle with a bunch of dots on it that shows the intercommunication of a team depending on the team size. And basically the idea is when you have 10 engineers on a team, the communication gets very complex. And so in an effort to tone down the number of times you have to repeat yourself across engineers, we found mob programming as a way to say, okay, I'm going to say this once and then 5 engineers are going to hear it instead of just one other engineer. And it's going to start there. And I started reading about it and I started working with it. And we had a lot of success, not only because it was an effective tool to spread information and get up to speed on coding patterns and expectations for code cleanliness, but also because the ability to generate effective, high quality code increased impressively. sounded so weird when I said it like that. But you get
Yeah.
faster, right? It's about removing friction, about improving the developer experience. And so if you can do this, all the better to your team because you're able to output more.
So kind of curious, Adam, I know you've worked at a couple of big shops and things like that. Like, has paired programming ever been a part of kind of your career history?
It's
Or,
something that you do, like if you need help with somebody, if you need to get them blocked, if you need to pair up with somebody who knows what they're doing about something specific that you have no idea. But it's not like a day-to-day thing.
yeah. I mean, I've never had the experience of doing the whole like fancy, I don't know, extreme programming, 2 keyboards, 1 screen type thing. I've
Oh
never
no, I've never
worked in
done
an
that.
office like that. Yeah. That's not the thing that you're talking about, right, Noah, for the sake of
Mom,
people that are listening? Yeah.
2 keyboards, 1 screen. No, that makes me think of like programming in like Google Docs or like you can do like a live code share on VS Code, and I have done that before, but it's never been as effective as I wanted it to be.
Yeah. No, I
I
mean,
was
I think
talking
it's
about
like
like
different
the
speeds, right?
XP stuff from like the 90s or the early 2000s where like you have two people on one keyboard and one's watching and then you switch whenever you want. I've never done that.
Yeah, but I think that it evolved. Like for the people that still do it, I think they just do it with like a KVM switch. So it's just like my peripherals are controlling it, now your peripherals are controlling it type situation, and they just share one set of monitors or whatever. You might have your own like off to the side, but like the one that you guys work on, they do it for 8 hours a day. I mean, like bless the people for whom that works well. But
No, I
Well,
could never.
in the virtual world, because that's how pretty much most tech companies are these days. It's just I'll take the screen share and I'll share my screen, and then you take the screen share and you share your screen. So you kind of go back and forth as much. So not so much sharing a monitor, but like sharing the code base back and forth.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that stands out to me is just like, and it resonated in your talk, is I owe a lot of my early development as a engineer to paired programming. It wasn't intended to be paired programming, but we had just started on a client site and there weren't enough desks for everybody. So me and the engineer who had 10 years of experience were sharing a desk. And so he had the great, whatever, grace and, to let me be the keyboard. And so I had to be the one coding everything. He was kind of telling me what to do, and I'd have to ask questions, and we would discuss it. But the amount that I learned in that year, can you believe it? Sharing a desk for a year. But the amount of time that I learned over the course of that year, I mean, I look back on it, and I just like, what a fortuitous blessing for me. So I liked that part of your talk that people don't think of. It's just how much in this industry where mentorship is such a big part of how we do need to develop people, like paired programming, that is a massive win for something like that.
And I think that's somewhat, I don't want to say a lost art, but that is part of my speech that I actually ended up cutting, was that if you go back, I don't know, 500 years, or it may happen in modern times too, but it sounds better in my brain if it's medieval. You have like blacksmiths, right? And a blacksmith's apprentice working in a blacksmith shop with a blacksmith master, and they're over there hammering out swords or shields or whatever. And the master can look over at the apprentice and correct them or help them or feed them along the way. But if you look at it in a modern era in the software world, most of the time, in my experience, juniors only get feedback on PRs or when they get stuck and they reach out for help. And that's a big one because sometimes they're worried about their appearances and they don't want to look dumb or what have you. And so they don't reach out for help or they don't time box themselves. And so they only get, just redlined PRs. And if you don't have a prior relationship, if you don't have an understanding, that can be tough. And it's not a great way to learn. It's hard to ask questions asynchronously through, not pull requests, fell out of my head. Code reviews. There it is. Yeah, I equate it more to having like a modern apprenticeship just in real time.
It's unfortunate we're really losing a lot of that with all the remote work that we have today. I mean, I'm remote. I'm the number one remote worker. I love it, and I'd never give it up. But that is something that we do lose, having those junior devs in the same building as the more senior people.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that because I felt much the same way. This has been in the news recently as the time that we're recording this because Jamie Dimon, a CEO in the banking space, raised a lot of people's ire here when he was talking about it. And I think remote work is one of these things that senior developers almost universally believe has not affected them negatively in almost any way. I mean, there's parts of working in an office I miss definitely, but I don't necessarily think that has affected my ability to get my work done. But like for juniors, or if I was a junior, I feel like I would have lost a lot, because I just think back of how much going to lunch with people, stopping at their desk and asking them what they were working on, that feels a lot harder to do remotely. And so this isn't about like seniors saying, we'll keep the remote, juniors go back to the office, because there's nobody for them to talk to. But the point is I do agree with you, Adam, that like, I think the remote working piece, maybe remote mobbing can help supplant some of that, but like we've missed these natural touch points for mentoring, because people don't talk in remote work nearly as much as they do in the office.
And I think one important part you mentioned there, Rob, is the idea of like the water cooler talk, or you're walking down the hall to go to a meeting because it was down the hall in a room, and you stop by your friend's desk on the way there and you have a little chit chat, right? So in today's meetings in a modern world, every meeting you have is scheduled and it's intentional, it's got a purpose. And so you join the meeting, you do the meeting, and you leave. There's very little, hey, how you doing? How's your family? How's your mom? Is your dog doing okay? You know, what's the weather like? I mean, there might be like a minute of pleasantries while people are coming in, but there's very little time to socialize as humans. And humans are naturally social creatures. And that's one of the benefits of mob programming, is that you can fill all those spaces in your work with just getting to know one another.
Walk us through briefly, like this idea. Again, let's just get the definition on the table here. So like mob programming, what does it entail? I mean, again, you talk about it in your talk, but some people won't have seen it. Sure. So like very mechanically, like what is happening and how is it happening and what are the other people doing?
Sure. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that most viewers, listeners are familiar with pair programming. So let me talk about how it's different from pair programming. So oftentimes pair programming goes one of a couple ways. One person will be hands on keyboard and they'll be working. And if the pair, the duo are disciplined, they will trade off every 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, kind of depends on the group, kind of depends on what's going on. But if you are not the person working, or if the communication breaks down and you're not the one who's got hands on keyboard, it's really easy to tune out. It's really easy to pull up Reddit or LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever distractions you have these days and zone out. And so what mob programming does, in its attempt to fix kind of this issue of becoming disengaged or stopping listening or boredom, maybe even, is that it rotates much more frequently. And so you can mob program with 2 people, just the same as you can mob program with 5 people. But the idea is you trade off every 5 to 10 minutes. My sweet spot's 5, but it kind of depends on the size. The goal is to get everybody to be hands-on keyboard programming from their station every like 30 minutes. So if you have 3 people, 10 minutes is great. And sometimes I will skew those times depending on who I'm working with. So for example, if I'm working with some junior engineers, I might do 5 minutes and give them 10 minutes each, because I'm going to be able to get through more in 5 minutes than they can in 10, because I'm going to spend my time explaining to them how it's working and how it's doing and why we're implementing these ways. And then in my time, I'm talking about why we're doing it, and I'm implementing and trying to show them how it's structuring, how it's coming together as I'm building. And ideally in mob programming, there's back and forth. So the person who's got their hands on the keyboard is not doing the talking. The person with the hands on keyboard is taking direction from the mob or everybody else who's not hands on keyboard at the moment. And so what you do is you get this idea of like a mastermind group around your programming problems. And it allows you to iterate quickly, sync up with everybody so everybody knows what's going on, everybody understands how things are supposed to be working. And at the end of the day, you're producing code. I think that answers your question, but let me add.
No, I like it because I found myself thinking through my objections to it. And I was like, okay, well, so certainly if it's switching that often, people must be working on different parts of the code, because how could I stop in the middle of a thought and then let someone else try to jump into where I was? And then I immediately thought, oh, that's what's motivating you to actually talk to the other people, is you can't just be off doing your own thing, because it is going to not be you at the keyboard in 5 minutes. You have to be explaining what you're trying to do and why, and they have to be asking questions, because they might be next and they need to pick it up from there. That actually seems really fun.
It honestly, I enjoy it. Depends on the group. You know, like D&D, if your group is bad, it's not going to be fun. So mob programming is the same way. But there's the other benefit that comes out of it is that when you go to actually put up your code for a code review, multiple engineers have already looked at it. So chances are it's clean. You're going to have one engineer who's in the code review, or who's in the mob session, who says, shouldn't we add tests? And the answer is always yes. Everybody knows the answer is yes, but it's easy if you're by yourself to say, not today. You know, it's the same thing with the gym, right? If you have an accountability buddy or like an accountability partner, it's much harder to say no to going to the gym. But in software, it's much harder to fall into bad practices if you don't have people who are keeping you accountable. So it makes the code review process go much more quickly as well.
Do you find in your experience that it is productive in the same ways when you do it with other seniors? Is it different at all? And not in the sense of like, obviously what you talk about is going to be different depending on who's there, but like, does the overall effect of it, is it any different? Or have you found it works more or less similarly no matter who's in there?
The conversation certainly changes because you can, and it not only depends on the seniority of the people you're mobbing with, but also how long you've worked with these people. Because if I've worked with another engineer for a year, they're already going to understand what I expect out of code and reviews and cleanliness and comments and tests or whatever the standards are for that given project. And so sure, the conversation changes, but it often becomes much more high level when you're working with senior people. Because you'll be talking more about things on like how do we want to implement this feature from an architectural perspective inside the system of our app, rather than, the button needs to be centered over here because it's, or it needs to take up the full flex box of its container, so it becomes a more high level strategic discussion rather than a small detail discussion.
How long are you like doing this for on a day-to-day basis?
So I've had usually mob sessions when I'm doing them last a few hours at a time. I think 4 hours is pushing it. I've done like a post lunch to end of the day mob session. And that can feel like a long time, but I mean, I think if you're doing it less than 30 minutes, it's probably not worth it. So anywhere from like maybe 30 minutes to a couple of hours at a time, because it is exhausting because you're on, right? You're mentally present and you're engaged and you're listening and you're giving feedback and you're asking questions so it can be draining, especially if you work with people who are introverted or more introverted than you are. And so that can be tough because you don't want to totally drain and burn out your coworkers. They don't appreciate that, and it doesn't work out very well in the long term.
Sure.
Who takes it over when everybody's done?
So usually the person, actually it doesn't matter, to be honest, because it goes in a circle, right? And so the idea is I use a CLI tool called remote mob programming. If you Google it, you can find it. It's like the first hit on GitHub. And the idea is anybody can finish it. So one of the benefits I didn't mention is that if I have to leave for a meeting and my team is still mobbing, I can just leave for the meeting and then come back, and then I'll hop in at the end of the queue and I'll be caught up in the context by the time it comes back to me. So the team can be really dynamic, and it doesn't matter who starts it and it doesn't matter who ends it. When you end it, it by default, the tool spits out a giant commit message of this person worked from this time to this time and touched these files. And so you can get a big history of who did what, when, where. But oftentimes I would say, I would rather have a meaningful commit message. Some people don't care about commit messages. I like commit messages because I think they're helpful if you need to go figure out when you change something. But the answer is it doesn't matter who ends it. Anybody can.
What do we do with I think the last topic on this is just like, what do we do with the seniors that sort of are against it? I mean, because I think like the way that we described one of the advantages was like, oh, it's really useful for the juniors. But like you said, it's great in senior to senior as well. And I think the seniors even get something out of the juniors because, I think anybody that's ever mentored knows that when you sit down with somebody and have to explain your thought process, the amount of times you go, ooh, I haven't thought through that very well, or, oh, I had forgotten about this piece, mm-hmm. right? Like you find so many things just by having to speak out loud, the benefits. Like, what do we do to kind of convince, I guess, you did a survey and it was a pretty sizable amount of engineers who are like, or senior engineers that are like, keep that away from me. Yeah. Like, what do we say to kind of go to maybe break through and help people maybe give it a shot?
So this kind of comes into like the sales aspect of how do you do it. And I think you kind of have to, you can do it on a person-to-person basis, but if you're kind of doing it more to like a group of people who are more against it, you can. Some people you won't be able to help, right? There's some people who are just like, I'm not doing it. I'm not listening to you. You're talking about it, and I've tuned you out. You can't help them. That's fine. You can only help the people who want to help themselves. One of the biggest benefits that I like to cite, use, tell, talk about is the fact that you get practice discussing technical topics. And if you become comfortable talking technically to other people, it increases a couple things. One, you're just practice communicating with other humans. I think over COVID, a lot of people's social skills atrophied. And so that's an important skill to kind of pick back up and maintain. It's like a muscle. If you don't use it, you get worse at it. So you practice your ability to communicate. It also helps it helps you establish some sort of, I hate to say like hierarchy or pecking order or anything kind of like that, but it's not really where I'm going. But the idea is that it helps you have discussions about something. So let's say the three of us are in a mob and we're talking about implementing some new feature into our system. And I say, okay, let's do it this way, right? And you two, having experience in this domain that I don't have, are like, whoa, no, a horrible decision. Don't do it that way. Here's why. Right. So it lets people draw on the experiences and backgrounds of other engineers to get a better understanding of why or why not something might work. If you have a better understanding of, I don't know, how observability works in applications, you could probably point out to me, he's like, Noah, you don't want to look at it that way. You need to actually change your whole frame of reference because observability is more effective from this point of view and coming into the app this way. And I might have just been saying, oh, I read a cool article and it said this thing, but if you've been doing this for years, you know better. And so it helps spread knowledge and everybody's learning. I have a big personal thing on that. Anybody of any walk of life can teach you something, whether they're juniors or seniors or the mailman or the sanitation workers, right? So my favorite example there is, I know nothing about squeegees, but I squeegee my shower to appease my wife when I'm done showering so that stuff doesn't grow in it. What if I want to know the best squeegee that I can get so that I have to do less squeegeeing work? Who do I go to? I'm not going to an engineer. I might go to somebody who washes windows because they wash windows and they squeegee all day. They're going to be more knowledgeable. So the point being, though, kind of getting off on a tangent, is that it gives a chance to share knowledge and it gives a chance to learn. Because if we're not here to learn and grow and get better, what are we doing?
All right, well, there's more of this conversation to come, but first we'd like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs. This episode is proudly sponsored by This.Labs, your partner in modern web development and consulting. Here at This.Labs, we specialize in empowering businesses to reach their full potential through technology. We understand that in today's fast-paced tech environment, adaptability and efficiency are crucial. That's why we offer tailored solutions designed to meet your unique challenges and objectives, and our commitment to excellence and client success sets us apart as a trusted advisor in the industry. Discover how This.Labs can transform your business. Visit this.co to learn more about our services and how we can help you stay ahead in this competitive landscape. Thanks to This.Labs and my team for sponsoring this episode and for their dedication to advancing the developer community. All right, back to our episode. So Noah, another topic that I know you speak on a lot and have opinions on is kind of that way that engineers sort of advance in their career. We just talked a little bit about helping juniors kind of become senior engineers, and now we might be talking a little bit about helping senior engineers possibly get into positions of leadership, whether that be formally as managers or just, to higher positions of influence. And maybe introduce a little bit of the problem, because I know you've said that there seems to be sometimes like a glass ceiling above some engineers, or at least they perceive there to be one. What is driving that perception, and how instead are people meant to get around it?
Ooh, good questions. So let's see. The glass ceiling, I think, comes in when you don't know what you don't know. And that's again, kind of comes back to talking to people, right? But the issue that I see pop up is that people want to be prescribed leadership positions. They want the manager to sit in a meeting and say, Jimmy, you're taking charge of this feature. You are running with it. You're responsible. And then they walk away. And then everybody in the team in the meeting knows that Jimmy is now responsible for this feature. The reality is that's not how it works. And so in order to break into leadership, one of the senior leaders phrased it to me in the best way that I've heard, which is leadership is an active role. You cannot be a passive leader. It's not really a thing. And I've mauled on this and I've thought about it. And you know, as a general rule of thumb, I like it very well. And so how do you become an active leader? Well, a leader is usually one who is perceived to be in charge, call the shots, but also someone who can be trusted by their team. They're accountable. I can get into a lot of different ways. I'll try to make this a little bit more focused than just speaking my mind and letting it go every which way. But one thing that I vouch for often is this idea of servant leadership, where as a manager, my entire role is to make sure that my team or teams are not blocked by anything that I can help at all. And if I can't help it, then I go up the ladder, because my boss's job is to make sure that I am unblocked and that my team is unblocked, and it works down. So I serve my team. It's not that my team is serving me. And that's the idea of servant leadership. And so one thing that's important to note, that if you're trying to break into leadership, is that you are not, you cannot be a dictator in your team. Nobody is going to follow the person willingly who cracks the whip and says, you must work 8 hours a day with a pair programming buddy. Otherwise, no lunch for you, right? Like it's not how it works. And so the idea is you can come into leadership in a more, I'll say, natural way. And this is by using what's called soft power. Soft power is different from hard power in that hard power is more, as I mentioned earlier, like the prescribed leadership where the manager tells Jimmy that they're in charge. But soft power comes in when you're able to gain, I don't want to say followers, but like gain the trust of your fellows so that they don't have to worry about the things that you are managing. So at a base level, like on an IC team, maybe it's one senior engineer says, hey, team, internally to the team, I want to own this feature. Please let me do it, work with me and help me do it. And if you have other senior engineers who are worth their salt, they will help this person who's trying to come up, because the team is all about helping one another and helping itself do better. The best way that I've seen, and I think this is actually really important for lots of reasons, but the best way to start trying to gain some position of authority in a team in a soft power way is to review code. And I tell this to everybody of all levels, juniors, seniors, doesn't matter. You should be reviewing code. And the reason for that is, if you want to have a say over how features get implemented in your code base, you have to understand the code base. And there's no better way to understand it than to read the code that's going into it. And that allows you to actively gatekeep tech debt that you see coming in. And if you start off, if you're new on a team, if you're a junior, it's okay to not have critiques. And especially if you're starting out, you may not want to critique, but you can ask questions. Say, why is this implemented this way? We already have an HTTP client. Why are you making a new Axios instance for this fetching, for this feature? It doesn't need one. Or, it's about asking questions to try to understand. And that's really important, is you're not trying to ask questions so that you can beat people down. It's asking questions so that you can understand where they come from, where their mindset is, and then trying to help them say, there's a different way to do this, or we already have a way of doing this. And so code review is kind of the first entry into this. Also, code review is important in a leadership position because when you get farther into the IC ladders, you read more and more code, you read more and more documentation. And so if you're not used to reading code through code reviews, it's going to be slower. And so it's a good practice of reading code. You'll start to pick up patterns. You'll start to get kind of a gut feel for, this isn't quite right. I don't know what it is yet, but like I look at this code and I can tell that it's off. My personal kind of measurement device is, how many brain cells do I need to understand what's going on? The fewer the brain cells that I need to read code, the more brain cells I can use to write code. And I think that's important because we can only make so many decisions in a day. And if you spend all your decisions and your brain power trying to understand what's already there, you have less energy to figure out how to do it better or incorporate new things in such a way that they're extensible down the road.
Try to think about this. Adam, when you look back on your career, you don't have to name any names, but when you've had less effective managers or leaders, has it been more that they're overly passive or overly active? Like the dictatorial versus like, where is this leader? Because they were just waiting for someone to tell them what they wanted them to do, and then they were just going to do it, type of thing.
I think the role of like a manager changes a lot depending on what kind of company you're in. So when I was working at the low tier companies, I mean, manager, they were there to just tell you what to work on and you worked on it and that was it. And nobody expected more and nobody asked for more. That's just the kind of company you were working in. When I started working at companies like Riot and Spotify, then the manager is a lot more of like a mentor and you have a lot more say in the kind of things that you work on, and you'll have one-on-ones and you'll be able to guide a little more of like the roadmap that you're working on. So I think the job just changes a lot depending on where you are.
Yeah, I guess part of the reason I ask is just because my instinct is that there are fewer new managers that are more of the dictatorial mold, but I know they exist. Like you see them, you hear stories about them. They can sometimes be the most obnoxious and most absurd. But I see a lot more managers with the first time that someone gets a leadership role, they are that overly passive piece because they go from that sort of I need to protect my time and I just need to do my work mode into that I need to be a servant leader. I need to be available for people mode. And that actually has like a perversion when taken too far, which is that they expect there's a way to just take all of the input and there is a perfect response. There's always, given a set of input, there's always a correct solution out of it. And I think what I see a lot with new leaders and people trying to get into leadership is they don't realize that actually you do need to be opinionated because oftentimes it's hard to make all of the different people on your team as well as all of the stakeholders as well as all of the leadership above you happy at the same time. And I think a lot of leaders burn out in their first leadership role because it's all good when everything's sunny, but as soon as the first storm rolls in, they have no idea how to keep everybody happy and it burns them out to a crisp. And it's like they never learned how to take up space and like own what I call owning the middle and really like asserting what they believe to be correct. What are your thoughts on that, Noah?
Ooh, I think so. Let me mention one thing first, and then I'll come back. Is that I think that the management style changes depending on the team. If you have a team who is less experienced than you personally, then you're going to have more of a hands-on role, trying to say, here's how we're going, here's how we do things, here's how you separate concerns, here's how you layer your applications to make things extendable and scalable and all that. However, if you're working with a team who is your senior, like for example, my last engagement, I was the most junior person on my team with 10 years of experience. The other people had 12 to 15 to 20 years of experience and were all like principal architects. And I'm like, okay, so now my job is just to get out of your way.
Yeah, that's a tough feeling too, though. That really hits you. That hits you in the ego a little bit.
It does, and it certainly can. I like to think that, kind of going back to, you can learn something from anybody. And so if you try to take the chance to learn what the engineers are specialized in, you come out with a lot of knowledge. And I can say for sure that I learned a whole lot on that engagement, as tough as it was.
There's a good chance the role of the manager might change a bit. Like a lot of these aspects of management that we've been talking about, it kind of depends on the job market. Right now, it's a very tight job market, and people aren't jumping around as much because there's a lot fewer jobs. It's very much an employer's market. There's also been relentless cost cutting going on and layoffs. It wouldn't surprise me if management teams start to grow a lot over the years, and managers are a lot less interested in you being happy and this is what you're working on and do your job. And I'm not saying like I want that to be the world that we live in, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's the direction that tech heads in the next coming years.
Well, fingers crossed. I hope that's not the case.
Well, it's interesting too, right? Because it depends on what you get out of it. Yeah, I mean, like if you're just that sort of dictating, not even dictatorial, but if you're just dictating to people what to do, I mean, you only get but so much benefit out of it. And I think that goes to the people on the team who are later aspiring to grow themselves. Like you're saying, one of the best ways to get ahead is to be mindful of what your work is doing outside of the ticket you're working on. Like, okay, it's making the machine go whir in this way, but like, why is that relevant? And what are other people working on and like doing on the thing? Like, if you want to raise a team that can be self-starting like that, I don't think you can be that dictating type of leader, because you get to those really nasty teams where like everyone on the team, just nobody does any work. And so somebody comes in from outside and they're like, what is this team doing? And every time they do something, they like look over their shoulder at the manager and they're like, is it bad? Is it good? You know? And you're just like, wow, this team moves so slowly. And it's largely I find in those scenarios that the manager just never taught the team how to understand what their work was doing. So they just.
Well, dictator is a word you used, not a word that I used. There is, in a lot of bigger companies, and a lot of the higher end companies, there is an expectation that ICs are going to be able to vent to their manager, and if they're not happy with the things they're working on, that there's an expectation that they're going to be able to like share that, and there's going to be some like solution there. And it might turn out that that very expectation was kind of a ZERP phenomenon that may not exist in the future.
Oh, I mean, I think we're already seeing that change.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a manager shouldn't be a dick about that and try to be a dictator. But on the flip side, if you're an IC and you're not happy with the project you're working on, that just might be your job. And your job is to just work on that project. And you may not have a vector through which to vent to your manager. That's what I was trying poorly to get across.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, that makes sense to me, right? Is that idea that, because what you need to understand is if you have that opinion and you want to go to your manager and complain, you need to couch that complaint in terms of something that is relevant to the business. Like, I don't think I should be working on this because I'm not delivering the type of value to the business I could be giving. But if it's like, I don't want to be working on this because I don't enjoy this work more than another type of work, you should see how many types of work that exist out there that make
really
far
good
less amount of money.
Because that very caveat would be anathema to a lot of the devs that were raised in the ZERP era, what Rob just said. And like, that is very key. And I agree with that very strongly. But a lot of devs, yeah, there's changes afoot. And we've seen them already, like you just said.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of those great lessons for teaching people how to be more manageable. That's another fun thing is like, if you've ever thought about going into management and you just haven't done it for whatever reason, give it a shot for a little bit, because your understanding of what your manager understands of what you're doing will change drastically. If you want to be more manageable, be a manager for a little bit.
100%. Totally agree. Kind of along those same lines, if I may.
Please.
I see this come up often is the notion of you catch more flies with honey. Mm-hmm. You'll go a lot farther saying please and thank you, as you were talking about kind of on like a selling side, to be technical, is like you're phrasing things in the way that the other person understands, or the other person sees. It's like, oh, I'm unhappy, but that's not benefiting the business, and here's why. Right. And so if you are angry or upset or generally having a bad day, that's fine. But if you find that your interactions with your coworkers are mostly negative, you may need to have like an attitude adjustment for yourself.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun talking to people that like worked in very high stress like kitchens. You know, like Michelin-starred kitchens and stuff like that. And like you see the stuff, obviously we all see Gordon Ramsay screaming at each other. Okay, yeah, some of that happens in the kitchens. But what I've heard from the people I've talked to is just everybody understands their role. And, you know, you can have aspirations that you're better than the chef and you're going to have your own thing. And that's great. Let all that fuel you. But at the end of the day, you're also working a station. And if your station isn't run at the top level of performance, the whole thing doesn't work and the whole service falls apart. So it's like, if you want to get to those aspirations, you first have to master the thing that's in front of you. Never stop fighting to get something better. But like, at the end of the day, we all have a role to play, and we have to make sure that part of proving ourselves to leadership, to becoming leaders as well, is to show that we can accept the role that we're given, master that, and then set ourselves up for the next thing that we want. Right?
I like that. One of the key points in launch before we got acquired was that in order to be promoted, you have to put on the hat and walk the walk and talk the talk of that next position. And after you demonstrate that you are capable of handling that next position, they will then give you the title in the promotion of the raise or what have you. And what that does is it prevents the whole idea of people being promoted to incompetence, right? Because otherwise you'll get promoted to a point where you don't even know how to do this job anymore. And then you're completely incompetent, you're not helpful, and you're actually dragging everything down.
Well, that's a really cheery mode to end the conversation on, but we are pretty quickly here at the end of the time. For people that are interested in talking more about the things that we talked about, either getting that, some of the links, which we'll put in the show notes for some of the tools and stuff that you talked about. But if they're interested in hearing more about mob programming or leadership or anything else that you like talking about, can you let people know where they can find you online?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn. I guess I probably should have put my handle. I see that Adam did that.
That we'll put it in the notes. It'll all be good.
Good. Yeah. Find me on LinkedIn.
Okay. Yeah, I can see you're a regular poster there. I'm telling you, LinkedIn, man, it's the secret. It's the secret thing here. It's the social network's taking off. If you can get through some of the less favorable UX issues, there's some good conversation happening over there. All right. Well, that's going to be it for us today. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this Modern Web podcast. And thanks, of course, to our guest, Noah. As always, we say the conversation does not stop here. You can find Noah on LinkedIn. Find the link in the show notes. I'm not going to read the whole URL out. As for Adam, you can find him online at Adam Rackis. As for me, you can find me online at RoboCell. For the podcast, you can find us online at moderndotweb.com or on Twitter at modern.web. And as we close out, we would just like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This. Is trusted by top names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at this.co. One more time, that's THISDOT.co. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you all next time.